How many of you have ever done Zen meditation? A few? Okay. An overrepresented crowd in a Unitarian church, I'm guessing. Those of you who have spent time in a formal Zen community or a Zen meditation center or a monastery might know that often at the end of a session or the end of a day, there is a little hymn or a poem. In Sanskrit, the word is gatha, which is read out loud. And this one of my favorites, is a stark reminder of what we're messing with when we get around to spiritual discernment. At the end of the session or at the end of the night, whoever's leading meditation will stand up and say, "Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes and opportunity is lost. Each of us must strive to awaken. This night, your days will have diminished by one. Take heed. Do not squander your life." That's heavy stuff, particularly from someone who knows what they're talking about. And I wonder, when we gather to do what we're about to do today with the ritual of throwing our notes into the fire and letting go for the year, if it's some sort of attempt to remind ourselves not to squander our days, that our lives and the effects of our lives have consequences. We're certainly not the only people who gather to do something like this, maybe not on New Year's, but almost every culture and every group of people has some ritual of letting go, of giving up our burdens to someone or something. I wonder if any of you have traveled to Santa Fe for the ritual of Zozobra. Zozobra is a 50-foot giant marionette that in September every year, or the time of the Festival of Santa Fe, is set on fire. And thousands of people come and watch him. It would be like if big tech's caught on fire every single year. God help us all that never happens again. What happens is that people come and give up their gloom to old man gloom, zozobra, which is the Spanish word for anxiety, despair, a sinking feeling. It had its origins in 1924 when two artists moved to Santa Fe. The story goes that we can tell the origin of the story, it's apocryphal, either one of two ways. Either these two artists were trying to recreate this indigenous practice of burning Judas in effigy on Good Friday, or, and maybe both and, after selling a painting one night, they took the proceeds to a local bar, spent it all, found out that they felt no better, and this group of artists wrote their gloom notes on pieces of paper. What was keeping them gloomy and sad, and they lit them on fire on top of the bar, after which they were escorted out by the keeper. These two artists started this practice, and it's been going on since the 1920s, where this giant papier-mâché marionette on strings that moves and looks at the crowd is burned, representing all of our despair and gloom. People come and leave little gloom notes at the local newspaper office to be burned along with Zozobra, old man gloom himself. People go over the course of weeks and months beforehand and drop their gloom notes into a box, and they set them on fire. People also put their mortgages and legal papers and things like that in the box as well. But to watch this scene, it's pretty amazing. This huge, towering puppet caught on flames representing all of our gloom and despair. Now, it's not without its complications. Some people criticize it for having cultural misappropriation. There's often a group of protesters there from a local church decrying this pagan idol being set on fire. There are vendors, and it's being criticized for being overly commercialized. But now, every year, over 50,000 people gather to throw their gloom notes in and watch it be set on fire in front of them, to burn this man in effigy. What we do is a little different, but it has some of the same practice involved. I wonder if you've been thinking about what you were going to put into the fire today for some time. I have. When we come and put our little pieces of paper in and watch them burn quickly, we're doing something a little bit different than the zozobra ritual. There's no act of violence in this. We're not burning anyone in effigy. No one else is representing our gloom for us. In fact, what we burn today is likely a little bit of us. It represents something of myself that I am ready, desperately ready to let go of. And it represents a lot of work on our part too. Now, we don't read what you put into the paper, but some people tell us what they put in. And I know that year after year, people come and they put in things like their fears, their anxieties, their grievances with another person, maybe the person sitting next to them in the pew, or the person standing on the chancel. They put in their hopes for the new year, hoping that somehow it will get lifted up in an act of magic. Sometimes people put someone else's name on it. Sometimes it's grief or a diagnosis. But it's usually something meaningful. And what for? Why on earth would I write down something and put it on that little piece of paper and drop it in here? I know that it's not magic. But there's this long spiritual tradition that says that spiritual work and theology is done by subtraction and not addition. There was this guy named Meister Eckhart who was a 13th and 14th century German mystic. It wasn't Germany at the time, but he was living in what's now Germany. He was a priest in that area, and he had this radical teaching at the time. He would preach to his little church, and what he did was tell them that God was an abstract, unnameable, mysterious, all-creative force that was so creative that it kept spilling over, and it couldn't help but create new things over and over again, and it kept spilling into you. And that you had the living, moving God breathing and moving in your bones. But that we don't know it because we keep covering it up with all this stuff. And Meister Eckhart taught that our job was to give up attachments of all forms. He said we needed to give up all attachment to sensual desires. We needed to give up all attachment to outcomes. That we sat in silence and gave up even the attachment to our own being right, the hardest one of all. And finally, to give up all of your ideas of God. That the harder you strove to put your hands and life around that God you seek, the harder it would be to find it, and you never would. To even give up his teachings, he said. Now, if that sounds a little Buddhist to you, other people noticed that too, particularly the Inquisition. If it sounds like radical teachings for a 14th century German monk and priest, it was. He was brought before the Inquisition, but he died before any formal charges or punishment could be brought before him. But he's now readily used in Catholic monasteries today. There's this long tradition of saying that we discover who we are by giving things up. We discover who we are by giving up the things that are not us, or at least not all of us. Is your anger all of who you are? Is the grief you have of someone's loss all that defines you? Is your intelligence what defines you? Your capacity to love? Your health or your illness? Your wealth or your poverty? Do any of these things alone determine that you are who you are? And these spiritual teachers tell us that if we give up that over and over again, underneath the glass that we wipe away the distractions, we'll find underneath the real self. And Meister Eckhart said that because God kept spilling over into creation over and over again, if we got still enough and gave up our attachments, we would discover God, which because God kept spilling over was also us. It's kind of hard to hold all in your mind at the same time. So it's a lot easier said than done to do that. If it was as easy as giving up our addictions, pains, fears, grievances, angers, losses, as throwing them into a fire or saying, I'm done with it, we'd be a lot better people. And I would do this ritual every day. I would show up and I'd write something on it and I'd just do my work day after day after day. But I have been writing the same word on my paper for 7 years in this church. I have written the exact same word on the piece of paper that's in my pocket for 7 years in a row in this church. Why is that? I can't seem to give it up. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But my guess is I'm not the only person who has put the same thing into the fire year after year. I wonder if part of us doesn't know if we'll recognize ourselves if that thing went away. Maybe we hold on to our gloom, even the negative and hard parts of our lives, because it really would be hard to understand who we were without it. Would I be able to know who I was if I gave up being angry about that thing? Would I understand who I was without that addiction? Would I know who I was if I gave up my hopes for a future that I know at this point isn't going to happen? I might find myself in the fire, but I'm going to have to give up a version of who I am too. It is worth it, though. Like those words from Robert Walsh this morning, our actions have consequences. And in the past year, someone has died and someone was born. We've said words that can never be taken back. And we've done tremendous things that will help people forever. Elections have happened and not happened. Jobs have been gained and lost. Some things are settled. And I know that for many of you, the stakes are high. That this isn't some little gesture, that you walk up dearly and desperately hoping that what you've written on that paper will leave your life this year. I know that some of you don't want to give it up. Sometimes the grief is what we have left of a person. Or that memory is what defines us. But here's what I hope. I don't think that by throwing it into the fire or by sitting in meditation or prayer, I'm not sure that what we find is some timeless, eternal soul that is in harmony with God and will be for all time, and we're just waiting for the glass to be cleaned enough. But I do know that year after year, when I do this, I have more clarity about the things I'm not willing to live without. By giving up, I know that I am unwilling to live without love in my life, unwilling to live without love. I know that by giving up what I've tried to give up for 7 years in a row, that I am unwilling to live without justice, that I am unwilling to live without community, that I am unwilling to live without generosity and kindness. And I hope for you that if the magic doesn't happen this year, and if when you put your words into the fire, suddenly the world is not transformed, that you'll have a better sense of what you're unwilling to live without. What a worthy and decent life would look like for you. The things that you will never compromise on, that you would never throw into the burning fire. Because we only have so many more of these rituals left. I've done 7 of them with you. And being in this church long enough, I know that one of you in the room will not be here for next year's ritual. Maybe more than one of you. How many more of these do we have left? At the end of that session, at the end of the meditation, they read, "Let me respectfully remind you, life and death are of supreme importance. Time swiftly passes and opportunity is lost. Each of us must strive to awaken. Awaken. This night your days will have diminished by 1. Take heed. Do not squander your life." And so, my friends, as you throw something into the fire today, I hope that it does leave your life. I hope that the magic happens. And if it doesn't, I hope you walk out of this room more certain about what you are never willing to live without. May it be so today and all days. Amen.